We will turn, though, to Rudy Giuliani, a federal judge ruling yesterday that Giuliani defamed 2 election workers in Georgia following the 2020 election. The ruling means he is liable for damages, which will be determined at a civil trial. Former poll workers Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss sued Giuliani over his baseless claims they committed election fraud. Both testified to the January 6th committee that their lives were turned upside down by those false allegations.
Now I won't even introduce myself by my name anymore. I get nervous when I bump into someone I know in the grocery store who says my name. I'm worried about who's listening. I get nervous when I have to give my name for food orders. I'm always concerned of who's around me. I've lost my name and I've lost my reputation. I've lost my sense of security.
A lot of threats, wishing death upon me, telling me that, I'll be in jail with my mother, and saying things like, be glad it's 2020 and not 1920.
Were a lot of these threats and vile comments racist in nature?
A lot of them were racist. A lot of them were just hateful.
Giuliani conceded in a court filing last month he had made false statements about Freeman and Moss. He also failed to produce any evidence during the discovery portion of this case, leading to the judge's defamation ruling. In a statement, Freeman and Moss said the ruling brings them one step closer to rebuilding their lives. A spokesperson for Giuliani says he has been, quote, wrongly accused. Let's bring in NBC News justice and intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian and political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Greg Bluestein. Guys, good morning. Greg, I'll start with you down there in Atlanta. And just to remind our viewers about the allegations Rudy Giuliani made against these 2 poll workers, suggesting they were passing some kind of a drive with votes on it between them. Turned out that was a breath mint. And that led to things like people coming to homes of their relatives, looking for them, trying to push their way into the house, looking for these 2 people that Rudy Giuliani had villainized falsely.
Yeah, Willie, it was absolutely heart-wrenching testimony that we just saw, and it just reminded me of going through all that in 2020. These were not public officials, right? This is bad enough when our publicly elected officials and high-ranking politicians get targeted with this sort of vitriol. These were just rank-and-file election staffers, the cogs of our democracy, the people working in elections offices to make sure that we have timely and accurate election results. And they were being accused by Rudy Giuliani and other Trump allies, and in terms of Rudy Giuliani, in a legislative hearing in the Georgia Capitol, of doing something nefarious when, as you mentioned, there was no sort of USB drive. It was a ginger mint that Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss were passing to one another.
So let's talk about this case then, Ken, and the liability now that Rudy Giuliani faces and why he's facing it. He wouldn't produce documents for discovery. He says, well, the FBI took my phone. I don't have access to a lot of that stuff. Why didn't he provide that information, and what happens from here? What are some of the consequences?
They're huge, Willie. And first of all, I should just say, this is such a profound example of the human impact of these election lies. Really the most egregious that we've seen. And we could all hear the racist overtones in the allegations that were made against these women. And Judge Howell here in Washington, D.C., just decided that Rudy Giuliani was playing games with the process. He was refusing to engage in what's known as civil discovery, where someone sues you, the judge rules the suit is legitimate, and you have to start turning over documents, including secret financial documents. And he just wouldn't do it. And so finally, she gave him extension after extension. And finally, she imposed really what is the ultimate penalty, which is that she entered a judgment saying that he was essentially liable for defamation, for civil conspiracy, and for punitive damages. And there were a couple of really interesting lines in her ruling that I wanted to read to you. She said, just as taking shortcuts to win an election carries risks, even potential criminal liability, bypassing the discovery process carries serious sanctions. And she also said, donning a cloak of victimization may play well on a public stage to certain audiences, but in the court of law, this performance has only served to subvert the normal process of discovery. So the bottom line here is that these women do not have to prove their case anymore. It's proven. It's been established. Now there will be a trial about how much money Rudy Giuliani has to pay them. And he already owes them $90,000, according to this judge, for their legal fees. So it's a big blow to Mr. Giuliani. Of course, it's one of a long line of things that he's facing, including criminal liability. You know, there are reports he's got a debt of $3 million in legal fees. So his life essentially is falling apart. He's losing his license to practice law. But just add this to the list of legal woes for Rudy Giuliani.
So, Greg, let's talk about some of those other legal woes. He, of course, was just indicted a few days ago about that, in that matter in Georgia. A steep fall from grace indeed for a man once known as America's mayor. So talk to us a little bit about, though, how this matter in Georgia, this case here with the finding that he defamed these two election workers, what could that impact the criminal trial that he faces also in Fulton County?
Yeah, and this is front page news in Georgia because it hits obviously so close to home. Those allegations, those lies and conspiracy theories that Rudy Giuliani promoted doing 3 separate hearings, 2 in person, 1 virtual, in the Georgia state capitol in December 2020, are kind of at the root of all of this. He is being accused of being part of this far-reaching criminal enterprise that Fani Willis laid out, the district attorney laid out in her 51-count indictment, and it is very closely watched here in Georgia, and ostensibly we're thinking anything said in open court could also be used in these ongoing proceedings here in Georgia. So that is why this case is particularly being closely watched, not just because it's, of course, a local case, but also it could directly pertain to the criminal indictments.
So, Ken, let's talk about the timing of this case from DA Fani Willis down in Fulton County. You have Sidney Powell now filing a motion, the former attorney for President Trump, who was really at the center of all these false allegations in this attempt to overturn the 2020 election, filing a motion to sever her case, just like Mr. Cheeseborough did, and to go earlier and to go alone, saying she has no connection to these other 18 co-defendants. How is this all going to shake out? I mean, you have Fani Willis saying, all right, well, we'll just have everybody, all 19 of you, will go quickly. Speedy trial, here it is. How is this going to play out with 19 defendants?
Well, that's not going to happen, Willie, because Donald Trump and others are going to resist having this super speedy trial as soon as this fall, and they're probably going to win on that point. And that really actually presents a devilish problem for the district attorney down there, because then she's confronted with the prospect of having to put her case on and give Donald Trump a preview of it, essentially. Having multiple trials and having these early defendants go first, she has to essentially present the case. Then Donald Trump gets a crack at all the witnesses. He gets to hear what they're going to say. There was a really interesting op-ed in the New York Times the other day by an Atlanta lawyer who was really sort of criticizing the way this case was structured, saying that it was overly complex, that some of these charges really were sort of marginal, and that it puts the case in peril, or at least it's going to make it take a really long time. It really contrasts with the streamlined case on the same set of facts that Jack Smith brought here in Washington, D.C. against only Donald Trump. Again, we'll have to see how this plays out. There's a racketeering case in Georgia, as I think a lot of people know, that where they're still picking a jury after 8 months. So this one could take a while, particularly to see Donald Trump in a courtroom down there.